Story 1. The old antique shop in the center of town was known for having some of the most peculiar items. One day, a young couple stumbled upon a doll that caught their eye. It was an old porcelain doll with curly blonde hair, dressed in a delicate pink dress. Despite the cracks on its face, the doll was still in great condition and the couple couldn't resist purchasing it. That night, the couple placed the doll on the dresser in their bedroom. As they lay in bed, they couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was watching them. They tried to ignore it and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, the couple woke up to find the doll in a different position on the dresser. They brushed it off as their imagination and went about their day. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. The couple would wake up to find the doll in a different spot or facing a different direction. They even heard whispers coming from the doll in the middle of the night. One day, the woman woke up to find the doll standing at the edge of their bed, staring at her with its lifeless eyes. She tried to move, but she was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, the doll's porcelain hand reached out and grabbed her wrist. The woman screamed, but her husband was fast asleep and couldn't hear her. From that day on, the doll seemed to come alive at night, moving around the room and whispering to the couple. They tried to get rid of it, but it always seemed to find its way back to them. One night, the woman woke up to find the doll standing at the end of the bed, holding a knife. She knew then that the doll wasn't just a harmless antique, but something much more sinister. The couple finally managed to get rid of the doll, but they could never forget the horrors they experienced in its presence. Story 2. There was an old house in the middle of the woods that nobody dared to approach. It was said to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who once lived there. But one day, a group of teenagers decided to explore it, looking for adventure. As they made their way through the overgrown weeds and broken branches, they spotted a small, antique doll sitting on a dusty shelf. It was old and worn, with beady black eyes and a faded red dress. One of the girls picked it up, curious about its history. But as soon as she touched it, strange things began to happen. The temperature dropped, and the room was filled with an eerie silence. The doll's eyes seemed to follow them, and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the window shattered. The teens screamed in terror as the doll came to life, its porcelain arms stretching out to grab them. It was no longer just an old toy, it was a vengeful spirit seeking revenge on anyone who dared to enter its territory. The teens tried to escape, but the doll's power was too strong. It possessed their minds and bodies, making them do unspeakable things. They were never seen again, but locals say that on quiet nights, you can still hear their screams echoing through the woods. Years later, the old house still stands, a warning to anyone who dares to enter. And in the darkness, the doll sits, waiting for its next victims. Story 3. I never believed in ghosts or curses, but that all changed when I checked into the old hotel. From the moment I stepped into my room, I knew something was wrong. There was an antique porcelain doll sitting on the dresser, staring at me with its beady black eyes. That night, I had a nightmare. I was being chased by the doll, its arms reaching out to grab me. I woke up, drenched in sweat, and realized the doll was on my pillow, its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. The next day, I felt like I was being watched. I caught glimpses of the doll following me, its shadow lurking in the corners of the room. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that it was alive. As the day went on, my fear grew, and I knew I had to leave. But every time I tried to leave my room, the doll was there, blocking my path. It was as if it was toying with me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Night fell, and I barricaded myself in my room, hoping to keep the doll out. But it was no use. I could hear it scratching at the door, its laughter echoing through the halls. I knew I had to get out, but how? As the hours ticked by, my fear grew, and I could feel the doll's presence getting stronger. It was as if the hotel itself was alive, trapping me in its grip. And then, I saw it. The doll, standing in the corner, its eyes fixed on me. It was time to face my fears. With a deep breath, I ran towards the doll, grabbing it with all my strength. I could feel its porcelain arms struggling to break free, but I held on tight. And then, everything went quiet. The doll was still, lifeless. I stumbled out of the room, the doll clutched tightly in my hand. I never looked back, but I could still feel the hotel's gaze on my back. The curse was broken, but at what cost? Story 4. It was a beautiful dollhouse, with intricate details and exquisite craftsmanship. The family who owned it had passed it down for generations, and it had become a cherished family heirloom. But there was something strange about the dollhouse. Something that made everyone who entered the room feel uneasy. The family's youngest daughter, Sarah, loved to play with the dollhouse. She spent hours arranging the miniature furniture and dolls inside, imagining stories and adventures for them. But as time went on, Sarah started to notice that the dolls seemed to move on their own. She would leave them in one position, only to come back later and find them in a completely different arrangement. At first, Sarah thought it was just her imagination. But then she started to hear voices coming from the dollhouse. Tiny whispers that she couldn't quite make out. And then she saw it. One of the dolls moved its head, as if it was watching her. Sarah was terrified, but she couldn't stay away from the dollhouse. She was drawn to it, even though she knew it was wrong. As the days passed, the dolls became more and more active. They would move around when no one was looking, and Sarah started to hear them speaking more clearly. One night, Sarah woke up to find the dollhouse in her room. It had somehow moved from the family's parlor to her bedside. She could hear the dolls whispering to each other, plotting something sinister. And then they started to move again, their tiny feet tapping against the wooden floorboards. Sarah screamed for her parents, but they didn't hear her. She was alone with the dollhouse, and it was getting closer and closer to her bed. The dolls were getting louder, their whispers turning into shrieks. Just when Sarah thought it was all over, the dollhouse suddenly burst into flames. The flames consumed the tiny furniture and dolls, leaving nothing but ashes behind. No one knows what caused the dollhouse to catch on fire, but Sarah never played with dolls again. She was too afraid that they might come to life and try to harm her. And even though the dollhouse was gone, the memory of it lingered, haunting Sarah for the rest of her life. Story 5. At the annual carnival, there was a booth that stood out from the rest. It was a small tent with faded stripes and a sign that read "The Haunted Dollhouse." People whispered about it, saying that those who dared to enter never came out the same. One day, a young girl named Emily wandered into the tent, curious about the strange attraction. Inside, she saw rows and rows of dolls, all of them with lifeless eyes and chipped paint. But one doll caught her attention, a small porcelain doll with curly blonde hair and a red dress. The doll seemed to be looking right at her, and Emily couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the door slammed shut. Emily tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. She turned to face the dolls, and to her horror, they were all looking at her now, their eyes glowing in the dim light. But the porcelain doll was different. It was moving, its head turning slowly as it approached her. Emily tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The doll reached out a small, delicate hand and touched her cheek, and Emily felt a sudden surge of pain. The doll's eyes seemed to be growing brighter, and Emily felt like she was being sucked into them. She struggled to break free, but the doll's grip was too strong. Emily felt herself growing weaker and weaker, and she knew that she was going to die there, trapped in the dollhouse forever. The next day, the carnival workers found the tent empty, with no sign of Emily or the haunted dolls. Some say that Emily still haunts the carnival, trapped inside the doll's body, forever searching for a way to escape. And on quiet nights, you can still hear the faint sound of a child's laughter, coming from the direction of the abandoned tent.